Hey, welcome to the book log. Today I'm talking about And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. This book is so foundational to the mystery genre that it's pretty much impossible to review it in a vacuum. So much media from the last 85 years is in homage to this story and to Agatha Christie in general that it's kind of unfairly fighting expectations that it directly created. But in spite of all that, And Then There Were None manages to hold up extremely well. There's a reason people recreate it so often. It's got a fantastic premise with a lot of replay value. It's well written, it's entertaining, even with its somewhat familiar plot. But again, it's a plot that this book invented, so you have to kind of think about it from that angle. 10 people are mysteriously invited to an island and they start getting murdered one by one. It's made clear that there are no other people on the island besides the 10 of them, so one of them has to be the murderer. The book is perfectly constructed to repeatedly trick you into thinking you have some lead or another as to who is the true killer, and pretty much every time you are immediately proven wrong. Just really expert story construction on display here. I will say it's a bit difficult to keep track of everything at first because this is a pretty small book and you are immediately introduced to 10 characters. There were some moments at the beginning where I struggled to keep track of everybody, but they start getting picked off one by one in pretty short order, so you quickly learn who all the most relevant characters are. On top of all that, these 10 characters are pretty well fleshed out. The entire idea is that all 10 of them have, at some point in their life, committed a murder, but one which is unpunishable by the law. For instance, General MacArthur knowingly sent one of his soldiers on an impossible mission, fully understanding that it would lead to his death. Emily Brent sent her teenage maid onto the streets after discovering she got pregnant, which led to her suicide. Someone discovered all of these incidents, and that's why they were invited to the island, so they could be killed as a form of justice. That was never received originally because they are crimes that you can't really prove. Throughout the book, these characters grapple with their past sins, and it adds to the mystery of who the actual murderer is because all of their internal guilt feels so real. Another fun component to this book is the poem that accompanies the story. In my version, it is called 10 Little Soldier Boys. In other versions, the poem goes by a couple other names of varying problematicness. I won't recite the entire poem here, but it's more or less this nursery rhyme about how 10 little soldier boys die one by one in a variety of different ways until at the end, there are none. The poem itself is a recurring motif throughout the story, and each time a death occurs on the island, the way it happens corresponds to the 10 deaths from the poem. The poem itself is a recurring motif throughout the story, and each time a death occurs on the island, the way it happens corresponds to the 10 deaths laid out in the nursery rhyme. And on top of that, there's these 10 little soldier boy figurines on the center of the kitchen table that disappear one by one as the guests continue to get picked off. So while it's a pretty gruesome story about murder and the various ways these people are haunted by the sins of their past, it also has this really whimsical, folkloric quality, like a dark nursery rhyme come to life. This is where I'm going to get into some heavy spoiler territory, which, again, I usually do anyway, but seems particularly relevant to warn about in this case because the entire book is premised around a mystery that has a concrete, revealed answer at the end. I don't feel like getting into each and every one of the 10 characters in the story, but I'll just walk through my personal thought process about who I thought it was and why as I was reading through the story. My initial instinct was that the killer was Mr. Rogers. For one, early in the story, he seemed intrinsically tied to whoever set up the gathering in the first place, given that he was the butler. Also, his wife, Mrs. Rogers, was the second person killed, and I thought that could be a good bit of intentional misdirection. Why would he kill his own wife? Also, doing a bit of metagaming, but butlers are just inherently suspicious to me in this story format. Aren't butlers always the killer? I don't know. Either way, he was definitively ruled out due to being gruesomely killed with an axe, a death which would be quite difficult to stage. There was also a period where I thought it could be Dr. Armstrong. Just thinking logistically through the course of events, he seemed the most likely to have been able to administer the poison to Anthony Marston and Mrs. Rogers, and he was in pretty close physical proximity to the first few deaths. There was also a scene where he was missing for a while, and I thought he could be hiding somewhere on the island, not to mention the whole red herring line in his section of the poem. I never fully bought into this theory because the murder that he was accused of, killing a patient by performing surgery on them while he was drunk, seemed too real, and he seemed to have a genuinely guilty conscience about it. Then it turned out he was missing because his dead body was thrown into the sea, so it's not him either. I was never really suspicious of Philip Lombard nor Detective Bloor for the simple fact that they were the two shadiest characters. A mercenary and a crooked cop seemed too obvious. They were both great characters, though. I liked that they, combined with Vera Claythorne, constituted the last three live left on the island because to me they were the least 3 suspicious characters really kind of threw me through a loop, which leads us to the perpetrator himself, Justice Wargrave. He's an old judge who was accused of improperly sending a defendant to his death, despite the votes of the jury being in opposition to that. There was a brief moment where I suspected him, which is true of just about all the characters, to be fair, but I thought it might be him because a character brought up the valid point about how, as a judge, it would make sense he would be the one to judge and try these people as criminals as if they were in court. All my suspicions were dispensed with, however, once Justice Wargrave was literally shot in the head about halfway through the book. Of course, this turned out to be an elaborate ploy. Justice Wargrave spends the rest of the novel hiding throughout the house and setting up the next deaths in line. I'm not sure how anyone could have guessed that to be the case, but that's how it was. I like the way that this revelation is presented. Everyone on the island is dead. Investigators and cops and doctors are all flustered and have no idea what happened. And then the very last chapter, even after the epilogue, is a written confession from Justice Wargrave himself, found in a glass bottle that had been cast out to sea. He walks through in detail how he set everything up, how he came to learn of all the characters and their crimes, and then how he went about orchestrating their deaths, including his own fake one. He goes on to describe this crazily elaborate jury-rigged gun mechanism, no pun intended, that he uses to actually shoot himself at the end, so it looks like his death played out like how he originally thought it did. I just thought the whole book was incredibly clever. I was so confused and intrigued the whole time I was reading this, and I loved the disorienting feeling of every idea I had getting summarily shot down almost the second it rose up. Having Wargrave as the killer was fun. He was a character I enjoyed throughout the book, and it was cool to see such a confusing sequence of events be explained retrospectively in a way that made logical sense. Although, again, I'm not sure it's actually possible to guess it on your own beforehand. I know some people like that aspect of whodunit books, but I can see why this book is so foundational, and I can see why Agatha Christie has the mystery reputation that she does, and I'm excited to read more of these to see what other ways you can package a genre like this. I'm feeling a very solid 9 on this book.